I once gave my sister the key to my home during a blizzard and told her, "Stay here for 2 months. Stay until Tom gets better." 3 weeks later, I would watch security footage of my own son throwing her and her sick child out into the snow. How did a simple act of kindness turn into the worst betrayal of my life? My name is Kendra. I'm 45 years old, and until that winter, I believed I understood the difference between generosity and weakness. I run a successful import business based in Burlington. I built it from nothing long nights, calculated risks, contracts, negotiated with a steady voice even when my hands were shaking under the table. I believed in structure, in preparation, in control. My life was organized down to the minute. And yet, the moment that changed everything didn't come from a boardroom or a financial crisis. It came from a knock on my front door. That afternoon, my suitcase stood upright in the hallway, perfectly packed for a critical business trip to London. The flight wasn't optional. I had investors waiting, contracts to finalize, and the kind of deal that could secure my company's future for years. Outside, a brutal blizzard was swallowing the city whole. Snow lashed against the windows, wind howled down the street, and visibility had dropped so low it felt like the world beyond my porch had disappeared. My driver honked from the driveway, short, impatient bursts that reminded me time was moving whether I was ready or not. I had exactly 1 hour to reach the airport. Then the pounding started. Not a polite knock, not a neighborly tap. It was frantic, desperate. The kind of pounding that doesn't ask permission, it demands survival. I froze. For a split second, I considered ignoring it. In storms like that, people made poor decisions. Maybe someone had misjudged the weather. Maybe it wasn't my responsibility. But something about the rhythm of it, uneven, urgent, cut through my hesitation. I opened the door. The wind forced its way inside, icy and violent. Snow swirled across the threshold like it was trying to invade my home. And standing there, shaking so hard she could barely speak, was my younger sister, Mallory. Her face looked thinner than I remembered, pale, worn down. There was something hollow in her cheeks that hadn't been there the last time I'd seen her. Her coat was too light for the storm, fabric soaked through and clinging to her like a second skin, but it wasn't her condition that stole my breath. It was the child in her arms. Tom, her 10-year-old son, hung against her shoulder, limp and frighteningly still. His face was flushed, an alarming shade of red. Even over the roar of the wind, I could hear the strained rasp of his breathing. "He has a fever," she said, though her voice barely carried. She didn't need to explain further. I stepped aside immediately and pulled them in, slamming the door shut against the storm. The warmth of my house wrapped around us, but it wasn't enough to stop the tremor in her body. Mallory swayed slightly, as if the effort of remaining upright was the last thing holding her together. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just stood there, gripping Tom like if she loosened her hold, he might slip away. I hadn't realized how bad things had gotten for her. I knew the divorce had been messy. I knew she'd struggled financially afterward, but I hadn't seen her in weeks. I'd been busy meetings, expansion plans, travel schedules. I'd sent money once or twice when she hinted that things were tight. I thought that was enough. Looking at her now, I understood how little I actually knew. The taxi honked again, louder this time. Reality snapped back into focus. I had a flight, a commitment, hundreds of thousands of dollars hanging on a handshake waiting in London. "Mallory," I said gently, trying to assess the situation quickly, logically. "What happened?" She hesitated. That hesitation told me more than words ever could. "We had nowhere else," she finally whispered. No pride, no excuses, just truth. Tom shifted slightly, a soft, weak sound escaping him, and I felt something tighten painfully in my chest. He was burning up. This wasn't just a mild flu, this was dangerous. I glanced at the clock. 48 minutes. In that moment, my world split into two paths. One was obligation to my work, my reputation, the empire I'd built from nothing. The other was instinct to protect the child, who could barely lift his head. I didn't allow myself to overthink it. I crossed the hallway to the small entry table, where I kept the spare set of house keys. The metal felt cold against my fingers. I pressed them into her hand firmly. "Stay here," I said. "Stay for 2 months. Stay until Tom gets better." She looked at me as if I had handed her something far more valuable than keys. "You're sure?" she asked quietly. "Yes," I answered without hesitation. "There's food. The guest room is ready. Take whatever you need. Focus on him." She nodded quickly, tears welling in her eyes, though she tried to blink them away before they could fall. Gratitude mixed with something else, fear, maybe, or shame. I didn't press for more details. I didn't ask why she hadn't called earlier. I didn't ask what exactly had forced her to stand in a blizzard with a sick child. The taxi honked again. I grabbed my suitcase and paused just long enough to look at her directly. "You're safe here," I told her. "I promise." And I believed it. I stepped back out into the storm, the wind immediately biting into my face, as if punishing me for leaving warmth behind. I climbed into the taxi and looked back once more at my front door before it disappeared in the swirling white. As we drove away, I told myself I had done the right thing. I told myself my home would protect them. I told myself family meant opening doors when the world slammed others shut. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that the real danger wasn't outside in the blizzard. It was already inside my house. And it carried my last name. When I boarded that plane to London, I believed the worst part of the storm was behind me. I thought the danger had been the freezing wind, the empty roads, the sight of my sister trembling on my doorstep. I had no idea the real storm would begin after I left. 2 days after my departure, the silence of my house was broken not by the blizzard, but by the sharp metallic click of a key turning in the lock. That key belonged to my son. Caleb didn't knock. He didn't hesitate. He walked in the way people do when they believe everything inside already belongs to them. He dragged a sleek designer suitcase across my hardwood floors, leaving thin, wet streaks from melted snow. Behind him, Kylie stepped inside with careful elegance, shaking snow from her expensive fur coat as if she were arriving at a luxury retreat instead of her mother-in-law's home during a storm. They had planned something. That much was obvious. Later, I would piece it together from fragments, receipts, text messages, the tone in his voice when I eventually confronted him. They had assumed the house would be empty. They had imagined a private getaway in a heated, fully stocked mansion while I was overseas. They had not expected to find anyone there. Their laughter echoed briefly in the foyer before it died mid-breath. Because the living room lights were on, and Mallory was sitting on the edge of the sofa, carefully tucking a wool blanket around Tom, who lay pale and sweating near the fireplace. The flames flickered softly, the only warmth in a house about to turn cold in a different way. Caleb stopped short. For a moment, confusion flickered across his face, then recognition, then irritation. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice far too loud for the quiet room. Mallory stood slowly, instinctively placing herself between him and her son. "Kendra told me to stay," she said softly. "She said 2 months, until Tom gets better." Her voice trembled, but she held her ground. Kylie's eyes moved up and down my sister's worn coat, her scuffed boots, the small travel bag placed near the staircase. The silence stretched just long enough for cruelty to find its footing. "Oh," Kylie said with a short, humorless laugh. "I didn't realize your mother was running a shelter now." The words hung heavy in the air. Tom shifted slightly under the blanket, coughing weakly. Mallory instinctively reached down to adjust it, her movements gentle, protective. Caleb stepped forward, running a hand through his hair with exaggerated annoyance. "Mom didn't tell me anything about this," he said, as if that alone invalidated my decision. "You weren't supposed to be here," Mallory replied quietly, though not accusatory. "Just factual." That was the wrong thing to say. Caleb's jaw tightened. He had never handled correction well, not from teachers, not from employers, and certainly not from family members he considered beneath him. "This is my mom's house," he said flatly, which basically means it's my house. There it was. The entitlement I had spent years pretending was harmless confidence. Kylie took advantage of the moment immediately. She walked further into the room, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She nudged Mallory's small travel bag aside with the toe of her boot, as if it were clutter. "If you're staying here," she said coolly, "then at least make yourself useful." Mallory blinked, clearly trying to process the shift in tone. I, I've been taking care of Tom. He has pneumonia. And? Kylie replied with a shrug. We didn't ask you to move in. It didn't matter that I had. In their minds, my absence was permission. Caleb shrugged off his coat and tossed it onto the couch directly onto Mallory's legs. He didn't apologize. He didn't even look at her. He simply expected her to move. She did. Slowly, quietly, she picked it up and hung it on the rack near the door. Looking back now, I think that was the moment everything tilted. Because when someone accepts humiliation to protect their child, they teach the aggressor that cruelty works. Kylie crossed her arms. We're starving, she said. Is there food in this place? There's plenty, Mallory answered softly. Good, Kylie replied. Then maybe you can start dinner. The audacity of it would have been almost laughable if it weren't so real. They had walked into a house they did not own, confronted a woman I had personally invited, and within minutes turned her into unpaid help. Mallory hesitated only briefly before moving toward the kitchen. She glanced once at Tom, who was still sleeping restlessly, then began pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. Caleb followed, leaning against the counter, criticizing the temperature of the house. It's too hot in here, he muttered. What are you trying to do? Cook us? She adjusted the thermostat without argument. Kylie wandered through the cabinets as if conducting an inspection, making small comments about my decor, my pantry, the wine selection. Eventually, Caleb discovered the wine cellar. Mom's not going to miss one bottle, he said casually, selecting one of my most expensive vintages. That one sentence captured everything. He didn't see my home as something earned. He saw it as a resource. Dinner became an ordeal of subtle degradation. Kylie complained that the soup was too salty. Caleb criticized the bread for being slightly over-toasted. They turned the television volume up so loud that Tom stirred uncomfortably in his sleep. And through all of it, Mallory remained calm. She moved carefully, efficiently, cleaning dishes while they lounged in the living room. She kept her voice low when she checked on Tom. She tried to remain invisible. But invisibility doesn't protect you from people who need someone beneath them. Later that night, Caleb and Kylie carried their luggage upstairs to my bedroom. They didn't ask which room they should use. They didn't hesitate before occupying the master suite. They acted like inheritors stepping into what was rightfully theirs. Mallory, meanwhile, gathered an extra blanket and laid it beside the couch near the fireplace. She refused to move Tom from the warmth. She slept on the floor beside him. And somewhere across the Atlantic, I sat in a polished London hotel room, believing my home was a sanctuary. I didn't know it had already become a battleground. I didn't know my sister was being slowly cornered in a house that was supposed to protect her. And I certainly didn't know that the cruelty unfolding under my roof was only just beginning. By the third week in London, something inside me refused to stay quiet. On the surface, everything was going well. The meetings were productive, the negotiations steady. I smiled at investors, signed preliminary agreements, and delivered presentations with the same composed confidence I had built my career on. But every time I returned to my hotel room at night, the silence pressed in too hard. Mallory had not answered a single one of my calls in 10 days. At first, I told myself she was exhausted. Caring for a child with pneumonia is draining, especially when you're already emotionally fragile. Maybe she was sleeping when I called. Maybe Tom had worsened, and she was at the doctor. Maybe her phone battery had finally given out. Hers had always been old, cracked along the corner of the screen. But the excuses began to sound thin, even to me. Mallory wasn't careless. She wasn't irresponsible. And she certainly wasn't the kind of person who would ignore me while living in my house on my generosity. If anything, she would have over-communicated. She would have apologized for every inconvenience. The longer the silence stretched, the louder it became. I would sit on the edge of the hotel bed, staring at my phone, scrolling back through our last conversation. Her final message had been simple. Tom's fever broke a little today. Thank you again. That had been nearly 2 weeks ago. I tried calling again one evening after a particularly long meeting. It rang until voicemail. I didn't leave a message this time. I had already left 5. I didn't want to sound panicked. I didn't want to sound controlling. But beneath that logic was something else. Fear. The next morning, instead of calling her mobile, I dialed the landline at my house. I told myself I was just being practical. If her phone was broken, she'd answer from home. The phone rang 4 times. On the fifth, someone picked up. Yeah? Caleb's voice came through, thick and irritated, like I'd woken him from sleep. For a moment, I couldn't process what I was hearing. Caleb? I said carefully. Why are you at the house? A pause. Then a sigh. Long, exaggerated. Kylie and I just stopped by to check on things, he replied. The storm last week was rough. Figured we'd make sure the heating system didn't freeze up. His tone was casual, dismissive. As if my question was unreasonable. I swallowed my rising irritation. Put Mallory on the phone. Another pause. Slightly longer this time. She's sleeping, he said. In the middle of the afternoon? She sleeps a lot, he added quickly. Honestly, Mom, she's been kind of lazy. Doesn't really do much. The word lazy landed wrong. It didn't belong in the same sentence as my sister. Mallory had always been the responsible one. Even during her divorce, when everything was collapsing around her, she had still managed to show up for Tom's school events, to send birthday cards, to ask about my business deals with genuine interest. Lazy didn't fit. Wake her up, I said evenly. I need to hear her voice. He hesitated. It was subtle, but I heard it. She doesn't want to talk, he replied. She said she's embarrassed about asking you for help. I told her it's fine, but you know how she is. The explanation felt rehearsed. Embarrassed, maybe. Silent for 10 days? No. Something tightened in my chest. Is Tom okay? I asked. He's fine, Caleb answered too quickly. Totally fine, running around like nothing happened. Running around. The last image I had of Tom was him barely conscious in my foyer, skin burning with fever. I pressed my free hand against the desk in my hotel room, trying to ground myself. Caleb, I said slowly. I didn't give you permission to stay there. We're just helping, he replied sharply. You should be thanking us. Before I could respond, he added, Look, I've got to check on the boiler, and the line went dead. I stared at my phone long after the call ended. Nothing he had said aligned with the person I knew my sister to be. And yet, I tried once again to calm myself. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe the time difference, the distance, was amplifying small inconsistencies. Then my phone vibrated in my hand. A bank notification. Fraud alert. I opened the secure banking app, my pulse quickening. There it was. A $10,000 charge at a high-end luxury boutique in downtown Burlington. Time-stamped less than an hour ago. My emergency credit card. The one I kept locked in the safe inside my home office. My breath caught. Mallory didn't know the combination to that safe. I had never given it to her. She wouldn't have asked. There were only 2 other people who had spent enough time in my office to even know where it was. The pieces began to move in my mind, not fitting yet, but shifting. Before I could process further, another notification appeared. A voicemail from Mrs. Higgins. My elderly neighbor rarely called. She was the kind of woman who watered her roses at the same hour every morning and knew exactly which cars belonged to which families on our street. If she called, something was wrong. I pressed play. Her voice trembled slightly. She apologized for bothering me overseas but said she felt she had no choice. The noise coming from my house had been unbearable. Loud music until 3 in the morning, strange cars lining the street, people stumbling across lawns. She worried about the neighborhood's safety. I felt the air leave my lungs. Parties. While my sister was supposedly sleeping all day. While Tom was supposedly running around. The contradictions collided all at once. If there were parties every night, then Mallory couldn't have been resting peacefully. If Tom had been recovering, there wouldn't have been bass shaking the walls. And if Caleb had only stopped by, there wouldn't be multiple nights of chaos. The $10,000 charge, the noise complaints, the silence from my sister. The story Caleb told me began to crumble under its own weight. And beneath that collapse, a darker possibility surfaced. What if Mallory wasn't ignoring me? What if she couldn't answer? I sat down slowly in the hotel chair, my hands trembling now. I replayed our last conversation in my head, the way she had thanked me, the relief in her voice when I told her she was safe. I had promised her that my home would protect her. Had I handed her to the wolves instead? Another wave of nausea hit when I realized something else. If Caleb had accessed my safe for that credit card, he hadn't just violated my privacy. He had deliberately searched through my personal space. He had felt entitled to it. And if he felt entitled to my money, what else had he felt entitled to? I didn't wait any longer. I opened my laptop and pulled up the airline website. The cost of changing my return flight was outrageous. I didn't hesitate. Money was replaceable. My family was not. As I confirmed the booking, my hands shook so badly I had to retype my password twice. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about contracts or quarterly profits. I was thinking about a small boy struggling to breathe in a house that might no longer be safe. I was thinking about my sister, who had shown up on my doorstep in a storm because she believed I would protect her. And as the confirmation email landed in my inbox, one truth settled cold and heavy in my chest. I wasn't flying home to comfort. I was flying home to confrontation. I didn't tell anyone I was coming home early. Not my assistant. Not my son. Not even the neighbor who had called me. The entire flight back from London, I barely closed my eyes. Every time I tried, I saw Tom's flushed face the day I left. I heard Caleb's dismissive tone on the phone. I replayed Mrs. Higgins' trembling voicemail about the noise, the strangers, the music shaking the walls. My mind kept circling the same terrifying possibility. What if I had misjudged everything? What if I had handed my vulnerable sister and her sick child into something far worse than the storm? When the plane landed, I moved quickly. No checked luggage delay, no phone calls. I kept my return quiet on purpose. If something was wrong, I didn't want anyone preparing a story before I saw the truth for myself. I told the taxi driver to stop at the bottom of the driveway instead of pulling all the way up. Snow still blanketed the yard, fresh and deceptively peaceful under the pale winter light. From the outside, my house looked untouched, grand, solid, composed. But something felt off immediately. The curtains in the living room were tightly drawn, even though it was early afternoon. No warm glow, no sign of normal life. Just a stillness that didn't feel calm, it felt staged. My hands trembled slightly as I inserted the key into the lock. The door opened, and the smell hit me first. Stale alcohol, cigarette smoke, grease. The sour, heavy scent of too many people in a space that hadn't been cleaned in days. It was so thick I instinctively stepped back before forcing myself forward. The foyer that I had kept immaculate for years looked like it had been through a careless storm of its own. My Persian rug, an heirloom piece I had saved for months to purchase, was stained with dark, spreading patches. Muddy footprints trailed across the hardwood floors, leading toward the staircase like evidence of disregard. Red plastic cups were scattered across every surface. Empty beer bottles lined the entry table. A cracked picture frame lay on its side near the wall. The glass splintered. I stood there for a moment, unable to reconcile what I was seeing with the home I had left. This wasn't just clutter. It was violation. I moved slowly through the house, my heels crunching over shattered glass. The living room looked worse. Greasy pizza boxes stacked high on my antique coffee table. Wine bottles, my best vintage bottles emptied and tossed carelessly aside. The fireplace, which I had imagined keeping Tom warm, was dark and cold. Instead of firewood, the grate was filled with cigarette butts. That detail lodged in my chest like a shard of ice. A sick child had been in this house, and instead of warmth, there had been smoke and noise. I called out softly at first. "Mallory?" No answer. I tried again, louder this time. "Tom?" Only the faint hum of the refrigerator responded. My heartbeat began to pound in my ears as I walked down the hallway toward the guest room, the room I had prepared for them before leaving. The door was half open. I pushed it fully. The bed was stripped bare, sheets missing. The small lamp unplugged. The closet door hung slightly ajar, empty inside. The space felt abandoned, not recently, but completely. There was no suitcase, no clothes, no sign that they had simply stepped out for a walk. They were gone. A sharp wave of nausea rose in my throat. I turned quickly, scanning the hallway as if they might suddenly appear. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe they had gone to the hospital. Maybe Mallory had decided to stay with a friend. Maybe. A low groan interrupted my thoughts. It came from the living room. I moved toward the sound and found Caleb and Kylie sprawled across the large leather sectional, tangled in blankets. Empty vodka bottles littered the floor nearby. The television screen glowed faintly with some paused late-night show. Caleb stirred first, blinking against the light streaming in from the open front door. He sat up abruptly when he saw me standing there. "Mom?" His voice cracked slightly. Kylie jolted upright, pulling a blanket to her chest as if modesty suddenly mattered. For a moment, none of us spoke. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. The rage that had burned through me on the flight had settled into something colder and far more dangerous. "Where is Mallory?" I asked quietly. Caleb ran a hand through his messy hair, buying himself seconds. He exchanged a quick glance with Kylie, too quick. "She left," he said finally. "Left?" I repeated. "She stole some of your jewelry," he continued, his tone shifting into wounded indignation. "And then she ran off with some guy. 3 days ago." The audacity of it almost made me laugh. Kylie nodded vigorously. "We were shocked," she added. "We came by to check on the house and found it like this." She'd trashed the place and disappeared. "We've been trying to clean up." I looked slowly around the room at the bottles, the food containers, the ash in the fireplace, and then back at them. "You've been cleaning?" I asked calmly. Caleb's jaw tightened. "You don't have to take her side. She used you." Every word he spoke felt carefully constructed, like he'd rehearsed the narrative in advance. I forced my expression to soften. I let my shoulders drop slightly, as if exhaustion was overtaking me. "I just need to understand," I said. Kylie stood up now, smoothing her hair. She was acting strange, she insisted. Always on the phone, probably planning to leave. The lies stacked on top of each other so quickly they almost collapsed. Then something caught my eye. In the kitchen, the trash can lid sat slightly open. I walked past them slowly, my pulse steady now in a way that surprised me. I lifted the lid. On top of crumpled paper plates and empty takeout containers was a small orange prescription bottle, Tom's antibiotics. The label was unmistakable. I picked it up carefully. The medication was still inside, nearly full. No mother leaves behind life-saving medicine for her child. No mother. I turned back toward Caleb and Kylie, holding the bottle loosely at my side so they wouldn't immediately see it. "She didn't take this?" I asked. Caleb shrugged. "Probably forgot it." Forgot it. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time in my life, I saw someone I didn't recognize. Not because he was angry, not because he was defensive, but because he genuinely believed I might accept that explanation. The room felt very quiet suddenly. I nodded slowly, as if processing everything they had said. Inside, something had shifted permanently. If Mallory had left voluntarily, she would not have left this behind. If she had run off, she would not have stripped the guest room bare without taking essentials. And if she had truly stolen from me, Caleb would have been furious, not calm enough to construct a detailed narrative. I forced a small, tired smile. "I'm just overwhelmed," I said softly. "This trip, the stress, coming home to this." Caleb's posture relaxed slightly. He thought he had convinced me. That was his mistake. Because in that moment, standing in my ruined living room, holding a bottle of antibiotics that told a different story, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. My sister had not left by choice. And whatever had happened inside my house while I was gone, my son was at the center of it. I didn't confront them again that afternoon. Instead, I excused myself and walked calmly down the hallway toward my home office. If they were going to lie to me, I would let them, because I wasn't going to argue without proof. And I had installed cameras for a reason. I locked the door to my home office and stood there for a moment, my back pressed against the wood, listening. Upstairs, I could hear faint movement, drawers opening, water running, Kylie's voice drifting down the hallway in an irritated whisper. They were probably trying to piece together whether I believed their story, whether they needed to adjust it. They had no idea that the truth was already waiting for me inside this room. I walked to my desk slowly and opened my laptop. My hands looked steady, but I could feel the tremor beneath the surface, like the aftershock of an earthquake that hadn't fully settled. Years ago, after a break-in in the neighborhood, I had installed interior security cameras in the entryway and living room. I told Caleb about the exterior ones. I never mentioned the hidden interior system. It had been for insurance purposes, purely practical. That practicality was about to save lives. I logged into the secure server and scrolled back through the timeline. Date after date flashed past. Party nights, probably. Moments of chaos I hadn't yet seen. I searched for the day Caleb claimed Mallory had run off. 3 days ago. I pressed play. The footage loaded in crisp, unforgiving clarity. At first, it showed the living room as I had left it quiet, warm, Tom asleep near the fireplace. Then the door opened violently. Snow blew inside. Kylie entered first, dragging one of Mallory's small suitcases behind her. She didn't carry it gently. She yanked it, the wheels catching on the doorframe before she lifted it and hurled it onto the porch. My breath caught in my throat. A second later, Caleb appeared in frame. He had Mallory by the upper arm tight enough that even through the video I could see the tension in her posture. She was trying to pull back, one hand shielding Tom, who stood unsteadily beside her in his socks. Her mouth was moving rapidly. Even without audio, I could see she was pleading. She pointed toward the storm outside, toward Tom, toward something that clearly meant, please. Caleb didn't hesitate. He shoved her. Hard. She stumbled forward onto the snow-covered porch, falling to one knee while trying to keep Tom upright. The boy wavered, disoriented, clutching at her coat. Then came the moment that will stay with me for the rest of my life. Tom tried to step back inside. He reached for the doorframe, small fingers desperate for warmth. Caleb blocked him. And with one sharp movement, he pushed the child backward into the snow. I stopped breathing. Kylie laughed. Not nervously. Not uncertainly. She clapped once, like it was some twisted victory. Caleb stepped inside, grabbed the remaining bag, and threw it out after them. Then he slammed the door. I watched his hand turn the deadbolt. Deliberate, final. The screen went still as he walked away. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the paused image of my own son locking out a sick child during a blizzard. I had spent years protecting Caleb from consequences, paying off credit cards, covering rent when he lost jobs, explaining away his temper as immaturity, telling myself he would grow out of it. I hadn't raised a reckless boy. I had raised a man who believed he could do anything without losing anything. Tears slid down my face before I realized they were there. Not loud sobs, just silent grief for the sister I had failed to protect, for the child who had trusted my promise, and for the version of my son I had imagined instead of the one sitting upstairs. But grief didn't paralyze me for long. Because if that footage showed what I thought it showed, then Mallory and Tom had been out in that storm for 3 days. 3 days. Without proper winter clothing, without medication, without shelter. I grabbed my phone and dialed Mr. Vance. He had worked with me before on corporate investigations, discreet, efficient, relentless. He answered on the second ring. I need you to find someone, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I gave him their descriptions. The urgency. The last known location. Check every hospital, urgent care, shelter, motel within 50 miles, I told him. Money is not a concern. Time is. He didn't ask questions. He simply said, I'll call you back. The next 2 hours were the longest of my life. I paced the office, replaying the footage over and over in my mind. Every scenario felt catastrophic. What if Tom's pneumonia had worsened? What if Mallory had been too weak to keep walking? The temperature had dropped below freezing that night. My phone finally rang. They're alive, Mr. Vance said. The relief nearly buckled my knees. He had located a woman matching Mallory's description at a place called the Sleep Ease Motel on the outskirts of town. The name sounded harmless, but I knew the area. It was known for desperation, not comfort. I didn't wait. I left the house quietly through the garage entrance. Caleb and Kylie were upstairs, unaware that their lies were unraveling. The drive felt endless. Snow crunched under my tires as I pulled into the motel parking lot. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting uneven light across cracked pavement. Mr. Vance stood outside a door marked 4, hands in his coat pockets. He gave me a small nod. I knocked softly before pushing the door open. The room was dim, lit only by a single lamp. The air smelled damp and cold, as if the heater barely functioned. Mallory sat on the edge of the bed, wrapped in a thin gray blanket. Tom lay beside her, shivering even in sleep. Her face was pale, her lips cracked from cold. There were dark circles under her eyes that hadn't been there before. When she saw me, she flinched. Not with relief, with fear. "I'm sorry," she whispered immediately. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I didn't mean to lose the house." Lose the house. That was the story Caleb had fed her. I crossed the room in 2 steps and wrapped my arms around her. She was so thin it startled me. Tom stirred, coughing weakly against her shoulder. "You didn't lose anything," I told her firmly. "You were thrown out." Her body stiffened. She shook her head instinctively, still trying to protect me from the truth. "It was my fault," she said softly. "I shouldn't have argued." The words cut deeper than the footage. Because they meant she believed she deserved it. I pulled back and looked at her directly. "Listen to me," I said. "This is not your fault. None of it." The next morning, I moved them to a private hospital. I used every contact I had. Tom was admitted immediately, placed on intravenous antibiotics, and monitored closely. Mallory's hands showed early signs of frostbite. The doctors said another night in that storm could have been fatal for him. Fatal. I sat beside Tom's hospital bed that evening, listening to the steady beep of the monitor, and something inside me hardened into resolve. This wasn't just about anger anymore. It was about accountability. I had created the conditions that allowed Caleb to believe he was untouchable, and now I was going to show him what it felt like to lose that illusion. I squeezed Mallory's hand gently. "Stay here," I told her. "Stay hidden for a few days. Let me handle the rest." She nodded, still frightened, but trusting me. As I walked out of the hospital and into the cold night air, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to let my son believe he had won. And then, I was going to take everything he thought he owned. When I walked back into my house the next morning, I had already buried my anger beneath something far more useful: control. Caleb and Kylie were in the kitchen, casually going through my refrigerator as if nothing in the world had shifted. The smell of coffee filled the air. Kylie was scrolling through her phone. Caleb was barefoot, leaning against the counter, comfortable in a house he believed would soon be his. They both looked up when I entered. For a split second, I saw uncertainty flicker across Caleb's face. Then I did something that completely disarmed him. I smiled weakly. "I didn't sleep much," I said, lowering myself into a chair at the island as if exhaustion weighed me down. "This whole situation with Mallory, it's been overwhelming." Their posture changed immediately. Defensive tension melted into something softer. Predatory attentiveness. Kylie stepped closer. "We were worried about you," she said gently, placing a hand on my shoulder. The gesture was so rehearsed it almost impressed me. "I went to the police station yesterday," I continued quietly. "I filed a report about the jewelry. They said it would be difficult to track her down if she left the state." Caleb nodded quickly, too quickly. "That's what I figured," he said. "She seemed unstable." Unstable. I kept my expression tired, almost defeated. "Maybe I was naive," I said softly. "I tried to help her. I thought family meant something." "It does," Kylie replied sweetly, "but not everyone deserves it." I almost laughed at the irony. Then I shifted the conversation. "My doctor called while I was in London," I said slowly, rubbing my temple. "The stress. My blood pressure has been dangerously high. He warned me that if I don't slow down, I could have a serious heart episode." Both of them straightened. Money had their attention before. Mortality sharpened it. "I can't keep running the business like this," I continued. "I'm thinking about retiring, selling assets, simplifying everything." Caleb's eyes widened slightly. Kylie's fingers tightened on the back of my chair. "I just want peace," I said, letting my voice tremble. "And I realized something. Despite everything, Caleb, you're still my son." The silence that followed felt electric. I've made mistakes, I added. Maybe I focused too much on work. Maybe I didn't prepare you properly. But if I step back now, I need someone I trust to handle things. He swallowed. Mom, I can step up. I was thinking, I said slowly, watching greed bloom across their faces, of transferring the house into your name. Maybe giving you power of attorney over my accounts so I don't have to worry anymore. The transformation was immediate. Caleb stood taller. Kylie's smile turned radiant, almost glowing. You really should rest, she said softly. We'll take care of everything. Of course you will, I thought. Aloud, I nodded. I've already called Mr. Henderson, I said. He'll prepare the paperwork. I'd like to host a small dinner this Saturday. Formal, just us. To make it official. Caleb grinned in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child opening Christmas presents. That sounds perfect, he said. For the next few days, they floated through the house like royalty in rehearsal. Kylie ordered catering from one of the most expensive restaurants in town, using my credit card, of course. Caleb bought a tailored suit. They spoke in hushed, excited tones when they thought I wasn't listening. They never once questioned why I had forgiven them so quickly. Greed dulls suspicion. Saturday evening arrived precisely at 7 o'clock. The dining room table gleamed under chandelier light. Crystal glasses sparkled. Silverware aligned perfectly. The catered dishes were arranged with dramatic flair, as if this were a coronation dinner. Caleb sat at the head of the table in his new suit. Kylie wore a sleek black dress and diamonds that were not hers. The leather folder containing transfer documents rested beside my plate. They kept glancing at it. Mr. Henderson arrived on time, briefcase in hand, expression solemn. Caleb greeted him enthusiastically, offering champagne. The lawyer declined politely and took his seat without smiling. I stood and lifted my glass. Before we sign anything, I said, my tone steady, I'd like to share something. Caleb leaned forward, expectant. Kylie reached for his hand under the table. I picked up the remote control from the sideboard. The television mounted above the fireplace flickered to life. Instead of sentimental photos or music, the screen displayed black and white security footage. The front porch. The blizzard. The moment Kylie dragged Mallory's suitcase across the snow. The silence in the room was immediate and suffocating. Caleb's smile evaporated. The footage continued. Him gripping his aunt's arm, shoving her outside, Tom stumbling backward into the snow, the door slamming, the deadbolt locking. No one spoke. The wind howled through the television speakers, louder than it had that night. Kylie's breathing became shallow and uneven. Her hand slipped from Caleb's. I paused the video at the exact frame where Tom lay half-fallen in the snow. Then I reached into my pocket and placed the credit card statement on the table. $10,000, I said quietly. While your cousin was freezing, Caleb opened his mouth, but nothing came out. You left a sick child in a blizzard, I continued, my voice calm but unshakable. And then you stole from me to celebrate. Kylie began to cry, high-pitched and frantic. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that, I interrupted. I turned to Mr. Henderson and nodded. He opened his briefcase and withdrew a new set of documents. These, he said evenly, are the updated estate revisions. He began reading. Caleb was formally removed as beneficiary from all insurance policies and investment accounts. Power of attorney revoked. Trust allocations reassigned. The house placed into a separate, irrevocable trust under new management. Then came the final line. A formal criminal complaint has been filed regarding credit card fraud and financial abuse. Caleb's face drained of color. You're pressing charges? He whispered. Yes, I said simply. The doorbell rang right on schedule. Red and blue lights flashed faintly through the front windows. I had arranged for the police to arrive at the conclusion of dinner. 2 officers entered calmly, professionally. No drama, just procedure. Caleb stood in the foyer, with a hastily packed bag, tears streaming down his face for the first time in years. Mom, he said, voice cracking, where are we supposed to go? It's freezing. The irony hung between us. I crossed my arms and looked at him without anger, only clarity. You should have thought about the cold when you threw your cousin into it. Kylie turned on him immediately, rage replacing tears. "This is your fault," she snapped. "You said she'd never find out." Love built on money dissolves quickly when the money disappears. The officers escorted them outside. The door closed with a final, heavy click. The house fell silent. But this time, it was a clean silence. The next morning, I changed the locks. Legal proceedings moved forward. Caleb's wages would be garnished until every stolen dollar was repaid. Weeks later, the house felt different. Not because it was quieter, but because it was honest. Mallory and Tom moved into the guest wing permanently. We redecorated together. Tom built snow forts in the same yard he had once been pushed into. His laughter carried through the halls. And I finally understood something I should have learned years ago. Unconditional spoiling is not love. Love without boundaries is destruction. I had protected my son from consequences his entire life. In doing so, I had helped create the very cruelty that nearly destroyed my family. Cutting him off wasn't revenge. It was accountability. And for the first time in a long time, when I sit by the fire in the evening and watch my sister and nephew laugh in the warmth, I don't feel guilt. I feel peace. When I look back on everything that happened, I realize this story was never just about betrayal. It was about blindness, the kind that comes from loving someone so fiercely that you refuse to see who they've become. I believed that providing comfort, money, and second chances was the same as being a good mother. But real love is not protection from consequences. Real love is teaching responsibility before the world has to. What happened in that house was painful, humiliating, and devastating. But it also forced me to confront a truth many of us avoid. Sometimes the most dangerous people in our lives are the ones we keep excusing. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is draw a line even when it breaks our own hearts. If this story made you reflect on your own boundaries, your own family, or the cost of unconditional forgiveness, then you're not alone. These are the kinds of stories we explore here. Stories about justice, awakening, betrayal, and strength. Subscribe to Revenge Tale Network if you believe that truth deserves to be told, and that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the deepest peace. More powerful stories are waiting for you.